Have you ever wondered why a man who seems strong, capable, and grounded can suddenly turn silent, just when you start to see his soul? Why he can hold your body close, yet guard his heart like a fortress built against his own longing? It's not always arrogance nor emotional unavailability. Sometimes it's an ancient defense, one carved into his psyche by generations of men taught that feeling deeply is a weakness to be buried, not a truth to be lived. In the labyrinth of male psychology, emotion is both the key and the curse. From birth, he is told to man up, to turn pain into performance, to silence tears before they betray him. The boy learns that the world admires control, not confession, and so he grows into a man who wears strength as armor, confusing repression with resilience. He becomes fluent in logic, achievement, and distraction, yet illiterate in the language of his own soul. Beneath that silence lies something deeper: fear, not of love itself, but of what love demands: vulnerability, surrender, exposure. To love is to risk being seen, and to be seen is to risk being unworthy. Jung called this the battle between the persona and the shadow, the man's outer mask versus the unseen forces buried within him. The persona smiles, works, and protects. The shadow hides the wounds, the rejection, the shame, the emotional hunger he never dared to name. When a woman's warmth threatens to illuminate those hidden corners, the shadow resists. It whispers, "You're safer in the dark." So he withdraws. Sometimes subtly with jokes that deflect intimacy, sometimes abruptly, with distance that feels like cruelty. To her, it feels personal, but in truth, it's psychological survival. His nervous system has been conditioned to associate closeness with danger. He fears not the woman before him, but the flood of emotion she awakens within. And here lies the paradox. The same man who longs to be understood will sabotage the very connection that could heal him. Because love, in its rawest form, threatens the fragile order he built to contain his chaos. His avoidance is not rejection, it is self-preservation. He hides his emotions as a man hides his scars, not out of pride, but because he believes no one could love what those scars reveal. You see, every man carries an internal war between his animus and his anima, his masculine drive and his buried feminine essence. When unintegrated, these forces clash rather than dance. He seeks the feminine externally while suppressing her internally. That's why he is drawn to the woman who sees through him, yet terrified of her gaze. Her empathy stirs the anima he has long exiled, and that awakening feels like both salvation and death. To love such a man is to step into his shadow. It's to touch the part of him that even he fears to touch. But many women misunderstand this silence, taking it as a verdict of indifference. It's not. It's a symptom of disconnection, from self, from softness, from the sacred. Jung wrote that what we repress never disappears. It only waits for recognition. When he hides, he's not hiding from you. He's hiding from the storm that once broke him. And yet, beneath his stoicism lies a longing for redemption. He yearns for the one who will not demand his vulnerability, but invite it, not by forcing him to speak, but by holding the space where he feels safe enough to unravel. For only when a man's soul feels unjudged can he begin to reveal its language. Slowly, haltingly, like a soldier returning home from a war he never admitted he fought. But here's the truth few dare to speak. You cannot heal a man by becoming his therapist, his savior, or his mirror. You can only awaken the mirror within him. When he sees that your love does not crumble under his silence, that your strength is not control but compassion, he begins to feel what no lecture could teach him. That emotion is not weakness, it is wisdom. Yet the woman must tread carefully, for the same power that can awaken him can also exhaust her. She must know when to reach and when to release. To love him without losing herself is the greatest spiritual discipline, because when she confuses compassion with sacrifice, she too enters the shadow, hers, not his. The rescuer archetype is seductive. It feeds the illusion of control, but in trying to save him, she may abandon the very boundaries that keep her spirit alive. So the question is not why he hides, but why you feel compelled to chase what hides from you. In that mirror lies your own work, your own shadow of worthiness, your own pattern of seeking validation through the unreachable. For every emotionally guarded man mirrors a part of the feminine that still believes love must be earned through endurance. He hides his emotions because he was never taught they were sacred. You pursue them because you were taught that love without struggle is not real. Both are illusions born of pain. Both can be healed, but only through awareness. When a man hides his emotions, it is not merely silence, it is a ritual, a form of unconscious prayer to the gods of control. His restraint, his distance, his careful avoidance of emotional exposure, these are not accidents. They are the remnants of ancient conditioning, inherited through generations of fathers who taught their sons that vulnerability is a form of death. And in a way, they were right. For to feel deeply is to die to the image of strength that society demands of him. Every man carries within him the memory of the boy he once was, open, expressive, longing to be seen. But the boy learned quickly that tears made others uncomfortable, that softness was mocked, that sincerity was punished. So he built walls out of intellect, humor, and ambition. He became what Jung called the controlled ego, a structure so rigid it can no longer breathe. And beneath that structure lies the ghost of the emotional child, pacing the halls of his own mind, asking quietly, is it safe yet to come? Out? When he meets a woman who embodies warmth, intuition, and receptivity, something ancient stirs in him. It is not just attraction, it is recognition. His soul remembers the feminine it once banished. Her presence disarms his intellect. Her compassion unsettles his defenses. But rather than surrender, he withdraws. Because her light does not only reveal her beauty, it exposes his shadows. Most women do not see this immediately. They mistake his detachment for rejection, his stoicism for apathy. But deep down, he is not indifferent. He is overwhelmed. The male psyche, when unprepared for emotional intimacy, experiences love as both desire and danger. His body wants to move closer, but his psyche screams to retreat. He stands at the threshold, torn between instinct and fear, between longing and pride. You might wonder, why can't he just open up? But the truth is, for many men, openness feels like annihilation. To reveal emotion is to lose control, and control is his last defense against chaos. His ego clings to order, to logic, to silence. It tells him, if you speak, you'll be misunderstood. If you feel, you'll be seen as weak. If you depend, you'll be betrayed. These messages, though invisible, govern his emotional world like laws etched into stone. The tragedy is that the very mask that protects him also isolates him. In his attempt to avoid pain, he prevents connection. And so he moves through relationships like a ghost, present in body, absent in essence. He offers protection, but withholds confession. He loves in action, but fears love in emotion. The woman feels this dissonance. She senses the warmth beneath his armor, but every time she reaches for it, her hands meet cold steel. And yet, there's something in her that keeps trying. Something maternal, perhaps. An instinct to nurture the wounded boy she feels beneath the man's silence. She tells herself, if I'm patient, he'll trust me. If I'm gentle, he'll open up. But the feminine heart must be cautious. For love cannot awaken what a man is still committed to hiding. No amount of affection can penetrate a fortress built by fear. Only his own courage can dismantle it. To understand his silence is not to excuse it. It is to recognize the architecture of his inner world. He hides not because he does not care, but because care exposes him to loss. He distances himself not because he lacks emotion, but because emotion once betrayed him. Somewhere in his past, he loved without armor, and that love ended in humiliation or abandonment. The memory of that wound has become his compass, guiding him away from anything that feels too real. But emotion, like water, always finds a way through the cracks. Suppression does not destroy it, it only distorts it. What he hides will surface in other forms: irritability, workaholism, stoic detachment, sudden bursts of anger that seem disproportionate to the moment. These are not random moods, they are the language of the unconscious, speaking in symbols and storms. When he avoids emotion, he also avoids transformation. For in Jungian psychology, individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires integration of the shadow. Until he faces his repressed vulnerability, he remains fragmented, performing masculinity rather than embodying it. He becomes a man of control, but not of peace. And you, standing before him, become both his temptation and his test. You are the mirror of his unhealed parts. When you love him, you awaken the very emotions he cannot bear to confront. That's why he both wants and resents your tenderness. It's why he oscillates between closeness and distance, craving your warmth, yet fearing it will undo him. This push and pull is not personal. It is archetypal, the eternal dance between the masculine that fears feeling and the feminine that fears abandonment. When you chase him, you confirm his fear that emotion means entrapment. When you withdraw, you awaken his fear of loss. Only neutrality, love, without demand, can disrupt the cycle. But neutrality does not mean indifference. It means standing in your own wholeness, rooted in self-worth, refusing to shrink or overextend. Because the moment a woman makes herself smaller to fit inside a man's comfort zone, she becomes invisible to herself. And no love that requires self-erasure can lead to healing. There comes a moment when every woman who has loved a guarded man faces a quiet reckoning. She begins to see that what she mistook for emotional mystery was actually self-protection, that the walls he built were not made to keep her out but to keep himself from collapsing. And in that realization, she must decide whether to keep reaching for the man behind the mask or to honor the silence as his choice. Because here's the truth. Emotional repression is not an act of malice, it's an act of survival. From boyhood, he was told that to be a man meant to conquer, to dominate, to never show weakness. So he carved away the tender parts of himself until only the disciplined shell remained. He became an expert in control over his career, his words, his expressions, but in mastering the external, he lost intimacy with the internal. His emotions didn't die, they merely went underground, buried beneath layers of stoic performance. And yet, those emotions never cease their rebellion. They appear in his restlessness, in the fatigue behind his eyes, in the way he stares out a window after an argument, wishing he knew how to say what he truly feels. But language fails him because the male psyche has long been conditioned to confuse vulnerability with weakness. His silence is the residue of centuries where strength meant suppression and emotion meant exile. Carl Jung warned that what we suppress in ourselves will eventually control us from the shadows. The man who refuses to feel becomes possessed by what he avoids. The anger he hides erupts in moments of rage. The sorrow he represses transforms into cynicism. The love he denies turns cold and conditional. Each unacknowledged emotion becomes a ghost haunting his relationships, whispering through every misunderstanding, every sudden withdrawal, every word left unsaid. The tragedy is not that he cannot feel, it's that he does not know how to trust what he feels. Emotion, to him, is unfamiliar terrain. It has no map, no logic, no certainty, and men crave certainty. They navigate life like engineers, not poets. When emotion arrives, unmeasurable, unpredictable, and powerful, it destabilizes the masculine ego that depends on order. He fears that if he surrenders to it, he will lose his composure, his clarity, his identity. But what he doesn't see is that the surrender he fears is the doorway to wholeness. The tears he suppresses are not his enemy. They are his initiation. To feel deeply is to dissolve the ego's illusion of control and to meet life in its raw, unfiltered truth. That's why Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires the courage to confront what you've spent your entire life hiding. The right woman does not fix this for him, she reveals it. Her presence acts as a mirror that reflects not only his beauty, but his unfinished work. When she looks at him with acceptance, he feels both safe and exposed. When she listens without judgment, the boy inside him feels seen for the first time. But paradoxically, that very safety can trigger panic, because the mind, conditioned to expect rejection, cannot yet believe in the purity of such love. So he distances himself again, testing whether her affection can survive his absence. He withdraws to see if she'll chase him, not because he wants control, but because somewhere inside he doubts he's worth being chosen without earning it. His emotional retreat becomes a reenactment of his deepest wound. I will leave before you can leave me. And the woman, empathic and open-hearted, senses this invisible tug-of-war. She feels his fear as her own, and if she's not grounded, she will internalize his withdrawal as proof of her inadequacy. But this is where her evolution begins. The moment she realizes that his silence is not her test, but his. She is not there to heal him, but to hold a mirror to his process while protecting her own heart. In that awareness, she becomes what Jung called the conscious feminine, no longer reacting to the wounded masculine, but witnessing it. She stops, taking his distance personally. She sees the boy beneath the man, the fear beneath the anger, the tenderness trapped beneath years of conditioning. And rather than pleading for love, she begins to embody it, calmly, quietly, as presence itself. To love a man who hides his emotions is to love the unspoken. It's to recognize that every silence is a language, every avoidance a confession. His detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the overflow of it. He feels so much that he must feel nothing to survive. And until he learns to face that flood, love will always be something he both craves and fears. But this truth is liberating too, because once you understand that his emotional distance is not rejection, you can stop chasing it as validation. You realize that your worth is not measured by how deeply you can reach into another's pain, but by how fully you can remain rooted in your own peace. And that realization changes everything. It breaks the ancient spell that told women their purpose was to soften men into feeling. The awakened feminine knows that love is invitation, not labor. You open the door, but he must choose to walk through it. At some point, a woman begins to realize that loving a man who hides his emotions is like holding a mirror to his unconscious and to her own. His silence forces her to confront her own patterns of attachment, her own longing for validation, her own desire to be the one who finally awakens him. She begins to see how easily empathy can become enmeshment, and how quickly compassion turns into self-erasure when love becomes rescue. You see, every relationship is a psychological mirror. The guarded man's distance calls forth the feminine wound of worthiness. His silence activates her instinct to prove her value by breaking through his walls. But this impulse, though rooted in love, often becomes a form of self-abandonment. She begins to chase his emotional presence, forgetting that true intimacy cannot be chased. It can only be met. Jung wrote that What you resist not only persists, but grows in size. The same applies to emotional pursuit. The more she tries to pull him into feeling, the more he retreats. The more she demands vulnerability, the more his ego clings to control. Because what he fears most is not her love. It is the confrontation with himself that her love demands. And yet, the feminine energy, when awakened, carries a healing power not through effort, but through embodiment. A woman who has done her shadow work no longer needs to convince a man to open. Her presence itself becomes the medicine. She no longer over-explains her value, she radiates it. She no longer takes rejection personally, because she recognizes that his withdrawal speaks to his internal battle, not to her inadequacy. In her grounded stillness, she embodies the divine paradox of love: deep empathy without attachment, connection without control. She understands that to love consciously is to allow others their timing, their pain, their evolution, even when it moves away from her. Because love that depends on change is not love, it's fear dressed as devotion. The guarded man will often circle back to this kind of woman, drawn like a tide to a shore he once feared. Not because she chased him, but because her energy reminds him of what peace feels like. She does not demand access to his soul. She invites him to meet her there when he's ready. And that invitation, free of a pressure, becomes the most powerful mirror of all, one that calls him into his own healing. But whether he accepts that invitation or not is not her responsibility. She has learned that the masculine cannot awaken through demand, only through inner readiness. Some men will step into their emotional truth, facing their shadow and learning to speak its language. Others will remain in the comfort of silence, mistaking repression for peace, and the woman who knows her worth will love them both. But she will not wait for either. This is the essence of individuation in love: to see another's wounds without merging with them, to hold space for their evolution without forfeiting your own. The feminine must reclaim her right to peace. Her empathy is sacred, but it must never be used as currency for attention. Her patience is divine, but it must never be mistaken for permission to be neglected. When she stops trying to reach the unreachable, she returns home, to herself, and it is in that return that she reclaims her power. The silence that once hurt her becomes a teacher. The distance that once confused her becomes a mirror of her own boundaries. She begins to see that every emotionally unavailable man in her life was not a punishment, but an initiation. Each one invited her to remember that she is not here to extract love from the unwilling, but to embody love until it becomes her natural state. The man who hides his emotions lives behind walls he built from fear. The woman who keeps trying to climb those walls lives in fear that she will not be loved unless she breaks them down. Both are prisoners of the same illusion, that love must be earned through pain. But true love begins where struggle ends. It blooms in awareness, in honesty, in self-respect. It cannot coexist with manipulation or self-denial. It does not require one to lose themselves to find the other. The emotionally conscious woman learns this not from theory, but from heartbreak. She learns that peace is not found in changing a man, but in accepting what his silence reveals about her own capacity to let go. And so, she no longer fights for half-presence. She no longer interprets emotional distance as mystery. She recognizes that some men love as far as their self-awareness allows, and that's not her limitation to carry. She blesses them for the lesson, releases them for the journey, and keeps her heart open for the one who will meet her in wholeness. Because eventually, there will come a man who has faced himself, who has sat in silence not to avoid feeling, but to understand it. A man who no longer fears emotion because he has learned to transmute it into strength. When such a man loves, he loves with presence, not performance. He will not need to be pulled into depth. He will already live there. And to the woman who meets him, love will finally feel like peace. In the end, What most people call emotional unavailability is not a permanent condition. It's a stage in the evolution of the psyche. The man who hides his emotions is not broken. He is unfinished. He stands at the edge of the great inner journey Jung called individuation, where the ego must confront its own shadow and the heart must reclaim what was once buried in shame. The real tragedy is not his silence, but his refusal to face what that silence conceals. For every unspoken word carries the weight of generations. Every withheld feeling echoes with the voice of fathers who could never say, "I'm afraid, I'm hurt, I need help." And when you look at him now, calm, distant, composed, you are not seeing coldness. You are witnessing a lineage of men trying to survive a world that punished tenderness, but evolution always demands courage. Eventually, even he will feel the pull of the deeper truth, that the very emotions he hides are the ones that will set him free, because nothing transforms a man faster than being loved by someone who refuses to mistake his armor for his identity. Yet even that love cannot do the work for him. Jung warned that no one can become conscious for another. The woman may illuminate the path, but the walk must be his. For when he begins to explore his shadow, he discovers the sacred paradox. The strength he sought through repression was always hidden inside his vulnerability. The calm he chased through detachment was waiting in his capacity to feel. But to reach this understanding, he must descend into memory, into pain, into every emotion he once numbed. It's not a romantic journey. It's a descent into chaos. He will rage, he will resist, he will grieve. And if he endures, he will emerge with something no mask can imitate: authenticity. The stoic facade will dissolve, not because he rejected masculinity, but because he finally redefined it. The awakened man understands that masculinity is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it, the capacity to feel without being consumed, to lead without dominating, to love without losing self. And what of the woman who once waited for him to open? She has her own metamorphosis. She no longer measures her worth by a man's readiness. She understands that love is never proof of value. It is a reflection of consciousness. She does not chase potential. She honors reality. She learns that her energy is too sacred to be spent translating silence or decoding avoidance. Her love matures from desire to discernment, from longing to wisdom. Now she meets men differently. She no longer clings to the emotionally unavailable because her healed heart no longer vibrates at the frequency of pursuit. She attracts what resonates with her peace. When she speaks, it is not to convince, but to connect. When she gives, it is not from emptiness, but from overflow. And when she walks away, it is not in anger, but in reverence for her own soul. The man who hides his emotions may never understand what she represents until much later. When the noise fades, when success feels hollow, when solitude becomes heavy, he will remember the woman who saw through him, not with pity, but with presence, not with control, but with compassion. Her gaze will haunt him, not as regret, but as revelation, because she was never asking him to change. She was inviting him to return to himself. And if he ever takes that path, if he dares to face the shadow he has spent his life avoiding, then love, real love, becomes possible. Not the kind born of fantasy, but of truth. The kind where two people meet not as rescuer and wounded, but as equals. Where emotion is no longer a threat, but a bridge. Where silence is no longer avoidance, but peace. It takes immense courage for a man to reveal his emotions, but it takes equal courage for a woman to no longer demand them. Both paths lead to freedom, because the highest form of love is not possession, but presence, the quiet knowing that you are whole with or without the other. And so the story ends not in union or distance, but in awareness. The woman no longer chases the man who hides. she blesses him and returns to her own becoming. The man, if he awakens, no longer hides behind stoicism. He lets emotion refine him into depth. Together or apart, both evolve. The dance between masculine and feminine finds balance, not through control, but through consciousness. Because ultimately, love is not about who stays or who leaves. It's about who grows. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.